Now, I think it pretty much goes without saying that the Obi-Wan Kenobi series was yet another divisive piece of Star Wars content, that there were certainly those out there who liked and enjoyed it, maybe even loved it, which, if that's you, that's great, I'm glad you did. And then there are those who didn't like it so much, if not downright hated it, which, again, I think is fine. As I always say, we don't have to agree on everything, especially when it comes to something as subjective as enjoying entertainment. That said, I think one of the biggest complaints many had with the Kenobi series was its adherence to canon, or lack thereof, I guess I should say, that it didn't fit as neatly between the prequel trilogy and original trilogy as maybe it should have. Which is interesting because this is something Andrew Stanton, co-writer of the 5th and 6th episodes of the series, recently discussed a bit, saying in an interview with Gizmodo, that was the blessing and curse of it. It's like, one, you're geeking out that you get to type Vader says this and Kenobi says that. You pause and say, I can't believe I'm actually getting paid to type this. I can't believe these words may be said. But then another part of you, it has to go through such a rigorous, like, does this fit the canon? And I feel like it's bittersweet because people care, but also kind of, it doesn't allow sometimes things to venture beyond where maybe they should to tell a better story. So it can sometimes really handicap what I think are better narrative options. Okay, so for the record here, I get exactly what he's saying, and I don't think he's wrong, that strictly following the canon, trying to make everything fit seamlessly into some overarching narrative, it doesn't allow you to tell the best possible story you could potentially tell. And no, I don't think he's just saying or using this as some kind of excuse to justify some of the arguably poor writing in the series. Because later in the same interview, he basically praises Joby Harold, the head writer, for making it all work regardless of the limitations, even though, yeah, as I was kind of saying before, a debate can certainly be had about how well it does fit, how well everything aligns with what we see or hear from Vader and Kenobi in A New Hope, how rigorously they tried to make everything work. Either way, he's instead saying here that working between two fixed points with very well established and beloved characters is difficult because it doesn't allow you the freedom to tell the best possible story you otherwise could with these characters. You can only tell the one that potentially already exists there or fits these rigid parameters, one that fits in the gaps of the other parts of the story, if you will. Which is then a big problem for Disney when you figure this is going to be a featured series on their streaming platform, one that's going to hopefully, for them, lure in many new subscribers and or keep the ones they already have. And so they're not all too interested in just telling a solid, though perhaps somewhat slow or boring story by Star Wars standards, you could say. That's more an introspect into the character of Obi-Wan. They don't want him sitting around the desert reflecting on the past and dealing with a mundane life. They want him out in the galaxy swinging a lightsaber and saving the day. In fact, it's more than likely the whole reason they wanted to do this series in the first place was to, well, as an excuse to put Vader and Obi-Wan together on the screen again to get them to fight once more. I mean, when the show was first announced, they didn't say it was going to dig deep into the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi during his solitude and exile on Tatooine. They said it was going to be the rematch of the century. That was the selling point. That was what, for better or worse, they figured would draw people in. That would be the spectacle that lured in an audience. Problem is, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is written in a way that very much makes it feel like getting to the spectacle was the only thing that really mattered. I can't tell you how many people I've heard or read that said the whole series was kind of meh to that final episode, that final encounter. It's like they wrote backwards from that, from Vader and Kenobi fighting, and story was an inconvenience that had to be created in order to get to the thing they figured everyone would line up to see. And it's a great example of something I always like to talk about, that being spectacle versus substance, which admittedly is sort of a rip-off from George Lucas once saying, a special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing. Which I do agree with for the most part, though I do think a spectacle or cool special effects can be impressive in and of themselves. Seeing a well-choreographed lightsaber battle, for example, one that maybe doesn't look like it was well-choreographed, or a massive space battle is still impressive and fun to watch. Heck, part of the reason why Star Wars was such a huge success when it first came out, why the first movie was a smash hit, and why we still talk about the franchise today, was because it was part spectacle. It was because of those amazing special effects by 1977 standards, anyway. In other words, it's not that spectacle and substance have to be mutually exclusive, but the spectacle should be used, as Lucas has basically said many times, It should be used to help tell or enhance the story that's already in place. That was the real key to the success of the first Star Wars film. It wasn't just Lucas trying to show off cool stuff. It was him using cool stuff to tell an already intriguing story. Whereas with the Kenobi series, you could again kind of argue that the story came about only because of the spectacle they already envisioned and wanted to give us. The goal was to get Kenobi and Vader against each other by any means necessary, no matter how much they had to twist or bend the words of characters from other parts of the story to get us there. I mean, you could almost go so far as to say the story existed to try and pay off the eventual spectacle. It certainly wasn't done to enhance the greater story of Star Wars, I'd say. Which then makes it feel like the very opposite of something like Andor, something that has also been rather divisive. There are people who love it, and there are certainly people who hate it. But it is something that is heavily focused on a story that can go entire episodes without any action whatsoever, which again makes people say this doesn't feel very Star Wars-like, since Star Wars does tend to be a mixture of spectacle and substance. Nevertheless, Andor does eventually use spectacle or more action-packed episodes to help pay off the story it is setting up. In other words, it doesn't feel like Andor exists simply to show us how cool Star Wars stuff can be. And actually, it kind of actively avoids all the cool Star Wars stuff. It feels like it wants to be a story first and foremost, and one that expands the greater story in many different and fascinating ways. And for me and others, it's almost been like this refreshing change of pace or breath of fresh air into the franchise, which isn't to say I don't enjoy spectacle, because yeah, I love lightsabers and space battles, I love the Force and everything Jedi and Sith, and I want more of that from Star Wars in the future. But I gotta say, it's been so nice that this show doesn't exist just as an excuse to give us all that it instead wants to tell a story that sort of digs down deep into the very foundation of the galaxy itself, or the galaxy during the height of the Empire. It makes it more fleshed out and sort of real than it has ever been or felt before, you could argue. That it's showing us the people that make up the galaxy and how they have suffered under the rule of the Empire. It's showing us what the rebellion was truly up against and why winning was of the utmost importance. It's making the Empire a terrible and terrifying evil regime that would indeed get the people of the galaxy to eventually stand up, unite, and fight to the death to oppose it. Which, for me, just my opinion, gives so much more meaning and context to the eventual actions of our heroes in the original trilogy that leads to the end or destruction of that empire. This show somehow does more for the heroes of the galaxy who aren't even in it, like Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, Chewie, Wedge, the list goes on, than the Kenobi series did to enhance his character, even though, yeah, he was literally in it and it was more or less about him. But instead of trying to really get inside Kenobi's mind or his mindset and enhance the character from the inside out, it just wanted to go big and push and expand past the boundaries. You now literally have one of the writers lamenting that he couldn't do more when he may have been better off trying to do something less, where less, something small in scope and scale, would have likely been more for the character. Because I certainly think there's a story that could be told about Obi-Wan during this time period, that there was room in the gap between the two trilogies that could add something meaningful to his story. There was plenty of room for something of profound substance for the character, but instead they were only focused on the spectacle. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. And for those of you who have been wondering or asking if I'm going to continue the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that I started a couple months ago, yes, I will keep it going. I will be getting back to it. I'm probably going to do that, though, come December, in the gap between the end of Andor and the start of the Bad Batch. But yes, I am going to get back to it. Either way, do leave your comments below about this video, or go check out the first part of that Kenobi series if you want to, or to refresh your memory. And let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.